After what echoed outside my window that night, I bolted upright in bed, trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't tell how far the source was from our yard. The sounds weren't particularly loud, or perhaps I just have good windows, but I recognized them instantly. Those garbled radio transmissions in an unknown tongue, the static, and most importantly, the siren. The siren wailed in the distance, sounding as if it were warning everyone of an incoming nuclear strike. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, half asleep, wondering what kind of creature makes these sounds. Once again, my mind replayed the events that had forced me to drop everything and flee from my fishing trip with every ounce of strength I had left. The memories hit me like a massive wave, rushing from my head to my toes, leaving me covered in goosebumps and making my hair stand on end. "It's been over a week," I whispered to myself. I had slowly begun to forget those horrific events. In the rush of family life, you can forget almost anything. But how? How did it end up here? It was close. Those God-forsaken sounds were audible. The siren was clear. Maybe, just maybe, I was imagining it, or it was a dream? I didn't know, but how could an anomalously large creature slip into the city unnoticed? How was that possible? No, I must have dreamed it, I muttered. If it were real, everyone would be sounding the alarm by now. I checked the clock. 1 a.m., heading toward 2. I walked to the kitchen and looked out the window. The street was empty. There was no sign of a 50-foot monstrosity with gramophones for a head in the neighboring yard. I calmed down slightly, and my heart stopped trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I lit a cigarette and stared back out the window when I heard my wife's sleepy voice behind me. "What are you up for?" she mumbled grumpily, filling a glass of water from the tap. "Just a nightmare." "I see. Well, don't stay up too long," she grunted and shuffled back to the room. It was pitch black outside. Only a few scattered lampposts illuminated the yard, and even then, only near the road. After finishing my cigarette and drinking some water, I was just about to head back to the warmth of the bed when I heard it again. It was barely audible, very similar to a car alarm. The sound put me on edge. I set the glass on the table, cracked the window open, and listened intently. But aside from a few passing cars and a light breeze, I heard nothing. Strange. Maybe I really was becoming paranoid, and there were no sirens except the ones in my head. A sense of inexplicable dread crept closer and closer. I couldn't close my eyes after I got back into bed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the apartment and the noises outside. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again, the siren and that strange static. It was exactly what I had heard back at the fishing spot. I could never mistake it for anything else. I remembered it all too well. This time, the sounds were louder and clearer. That was what finally convinced me I wasn't imagining things. That creature was actually nearby. A cold shiver ran through my body again. Despite being tucked under a thick wool blanket, my hands began to shake. Forcing myself up, I took small, hesitant steps out onto the balcony. Silence and peace reigned in the yard once more, but one small detail caught my eye. To put it mildly, the lighting in our yard is poor. There are only 3 or 4 streetlights for the whole area, all positioned along the road directly opposite our house. As long as I've lived here, those bulbs have worked without fail. It was always more or less bright on that road. This time was no different, and it was only thanks to that dim light that I spotted it. An extra pole. It stood between 2 others, but it was different. Why did it seem strange? Because streetlights are always installed at equal intervals. Here, that distance was off. Secondly, while all our poles are concrete, this one didn't look like it. It looked like it was made of rotting wood, overgrown with moss or fungi. It leaned slightly, and there was no light coming from it. I wasn't even sure if there was a bulb at all. But the main problem was that just minutes ago, when I was standing in the kitchen looking out, that pole hadn't been there. History was repeating itself. It was here. I felt it. I heard it. The sounds continued to drift from that direction, growing louder and more distinct. I stood in the balcony in a stupor, and the noise, or perhaps the cold I had let in, woke my wife. "What are you doing out there? Can't you sleep? Close the door, it's freezing. What's wrong?" "Yulia, Siren Head, it's standing in the yard." "Are you actually losing it? What are you talking about? I don't hear the sounds. I heard a car alarm in my sleep. That happens every night." Immediately after she said that, the siren wailed. Based on our last encounter, I knew that creature let out that sound the moment it spotted its prey. It had found me. Somehow, it knew I was looking at it, that its camouflage hadn't worked. Last time, it had also been pretending to be a pole. What is that?" Yulia asked, now fully awake, her voice trembling. "It's the thing I told you about." I thought you were joking." "Yeah, some joke. Go look." Yulia got out of bed and approached the balcony, though she didn't step out. "Where? Oh my God!" she screamed. I turned my head and realized it was time to run. It wasn't hiding anymore. Between the trees and streetlights, a massive, moving silhouette emerged. Each of its steps was accompanied by a mini earthquake that I could feel even from our apartment. The siren screamed across the yard, and one by one, windows in our building began to light up. People were waking up, staring out in hopes of seeing what was happening. But the creature didn't hesitate. It reached out with a massive limb, grabbed the power lines, and ripped them, along with the poles, clean out of the ground, tossing them aside like toys. In an instant, the lights went out everywhere. Our apartment, the others in our building, and several neighboring blocks were plunged into total darkness. The streetlights vanished too, and our yard became a void. The darkness made it even more terrifying because I no longer knew where it was standing, if it was staying still, heading toward our house, or moving elsewhere. The only way I could track it was by that siren, which felt like it was already jammed inside my skull. My wife just sat on the bed, her face like stone, silent. "Get dressed, fast," I yelled at her, frantically pulling on my pants. She just stared at me with wide, bewildered eyes. "Hey, do you hear me or not? Move, move, move!" Only when the sirens grew closer and grew even louder did she realize we had to pack and get the hell out of that apartment. But where to go, I didn't know. I was dressed in maybe 2 minutes and was ready to bolt when I thought, I'll take one more look out the window, just to see where it's crawling so we don't accidentally run right into it in the yard. But what I saw was enough to stop me before I even reached the balcony. It was already right next to the building. I didn't even need light to see it. Those jagged, garbled recordings it broadcast, mixed with the siren, were now deafening. My head was throbbing from the noise. My wife came up to me, already in tears. "God, what is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. I don't know. Maybe we should call the police?" Immediately after she said those words, a sound like a police siren erupted, but it sounded like a skipping, distorted record. What I felt then is impossible to put into words. I would try to psych myself up for action, but the moment I heard those sounds, I just wanted to curl into a ball in the furthest corner of the apartment and never see or hear any of it again. My wife was in the exact same state, but while I had encountered this thing before, she was seeing this horror for the first time. She looked like she had lost the power of speech entirely. It was pure shock and unspeakable terror. Then the events that finally forced us to leave began. I noticed someone in the neighboring entrance was foolish enough to shine a flashlight outside, effectively giving their position, and they weren't the only one. What did that siren-headed freak do? It simply raised its massive limbs and slammed them into the wall of the building with incredible force, smashing through windows and the walls themselves. It began methodically destroying apartments and dragging residents out, only to drop them from a massive height. The yard was filled with the desperate screams of the victims and the roar of crumbling walls. Nothing in life had prepared me for this. Fearing I would be dragged out next, I backed as far away from the window as possible, and thank God I did. If I had been a minute later, I would have shared the fate of those poor souls whose insides were now smeared across the asphalt. A massive limb smashed through the entire wall, taking out the windows and the balcony, the remains of which landed in the middle of our bedroom. Yulia shrieked, and I forgot to mention it had stopped the siren sound. Now its speakers were broadcasting the screams of its victims, joined by the screams of my wife. We scrambled into the hallway. Through the stairwell windows, we could see people falling through the air and shattering on the ground. Where do we go? Yulia sobbed. How should I know? Panic-stricken neighbors in pajamas and nightgowns were pouring into the hallway, having no clue what was happening. Ignoring them, we raced down the stairs, hoping to hide in the basement. Luckily, our entrance had a direct door to it.
As we ran, I realized it had stopped smashing the building. It had gone quiet, waiting for something. Deep down, I knew it had come for me. I had no other explanation for this sudden visit. I realized then, as I skipped steps on the way down, that people were dying because of me. I was the one who had brought this plague here. Not on purpose, but that was the reality. By the time we hit the first floor, I knew what I had to do. I had to lead it away at any cost. I know what you might think, that we don't have that hero mentality, that people here usually avoid problems or dump them on someone else. But I'm telling you how it really happened. I didn't run. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, I was shaking like a child. Though I knew if I didn't lure it away, more innocent people would die. I saw its visit as unfinished business from the forest, and in those few seconds, I made my move. We reached the basement corridor. I opened the door to our storage room, pushed the weeping Yulia inside, and told her I forgot something in the apartment. I ran back out. She screamed for me to stop, but I didn't listen. Our basement is solid. She'd be safe there. I wasn't the only one with that idea. Neighbors were rushing down there too. When I ran out of the yard, the scene was horrific. I couldn't count them all in the dark, but there were maybe 15 bodies near the house, a sea of blood and guts. People were literally broken. The creature was frozen, but the moment I stepped out, the siren wailed again, and it began to move. Without waiting, I jumped into my car, which I had recently fixed, by the way, fired the engine, and floored it. The beast surged after me. It was surprisingly fast this time. In the forest, it had been clumsy, but now it was sharp. With its size, catching my car should have been easy, but I was pushing it to the limit. I squeezed every bit of power out of my sweetheart of a car. It stayed right on my tail. I sped out of the yard, and I wasn't alone. A police bukanka was behind me. Someone must have called them. But the moment they saw the creature, they cut their lights and sirens, slowed down, and disappeared from view. I drove like a madman, the siren echoing behind me. The roads were strangely empty, and fortunately, no one else got hurt. Then I saw a gas station. I aimed the car straight into it and bailed out at the last second. The creature ran right after the car. My head slammed into the asphalt, and the last thing I remember was a massive explosion. For a split second, the siren screamed even louder. Then the sound died, and everything went black. I woke up in the hospital. I don't know how much time had passed. My head was bandaged, and my arm was in a cast. Everyone visited me. The police, the FSB. My wife came too, bringing fruit. I stayed there for about 2.5 weeks. Then came the endless grind of police interrogations and other agencies. They questioned me constantly, but not one of them mentioned an anomaly or a creature. They just told me there had been a terrorist attack at the building. I tried to explain what really happened, but no one wanted to listen. The most interesting part happened about a month later. Some people came to see me. I don't know who they were, but they had a specific badge on their clothes. I'm trying to sketch it now. They were clearly foreigners, using a translator. What they wanted was my total silence. They asked me never to mention what happened, to strike it from my memory. In exchange, they offered me $200,000. When they opened that bag in front of me, I was floored. I took the money, of course, but I couldn't keep quiet about this. 18 residents of our building died in that attack. 4 of them were just little children,